And that's really what the whole theme of today's talk is going to be about, is you guys are collecting a tremendous amount of locational data and behavioral data. And it's a matter of, how can dealerships actually utilize this? Because you got to understand there's still just this cloak of mystery behind how dealerships can actually utilize app data.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and you touched on it just there, is what's the behavior that people exhibit because of the locations that they're found?
This is the Strategy with Jason podcast with your host, Jason Harris.
Kevin.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And jamming with me. Yeah. And I appreciate you inviting us down here and giving us the tour of the Weather Network.
For sure.
Now, this is you guys' Canadian head office, or is there other offices?
It is. We have another office down at Liberty Village.
Okay.
So when we did an acquisition about a year ago, we kept that office, and it's now Pelmorex Audience. Is kind of the group that's down there, but we kind of share between those two offices.
It's a cool place. For you guys out there know how I geek out about technology. I walking around this place, I'm like, that looks like fun. Full big green screen rooms, lighting controls. That's awesome. Hey, for everybody out there that don't know exactly what you do here and how that kind of ties into the automotive space, if you kind of give us that 2-minute origin story, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So the Weather Network, the parent company is Pelmorex Corp, which many people are starting to recognize us as from that side. What had changed, I guess, in the last little while, the Weather Network has been around for now, this is our 30th year, so been in Canada for 30 years and very well respected, well known from the weather perspective for Meteo Media in Montreal and Quebec markets, and then of course the Weather Network across the country. What had evolved out of that is some of the advertising and the sales that we have as part of the products that we have from that perspective. We purchased a company called Addictive Mobility about a year ago, which allowed us to do in-app inventory outside of the Weather Network. So then we're able to use all of the data that's being collected from both weather triggers as well as location services, and then being able to offer that out to advertisers. In my particular role, I'm verticalized in automotive, so I deal with automotive agencies, both at Tier 1 and Tier 2, and then we've got other client partners throughout the building that'll deal with Tier 3 and dealer direct for some of the local campaigns from there.
Now, for a lot of guys out there that are sitting there listening to this and say, wait a second, Jason, this is an automotive podcast. How does the Weather Network and automotive kind of go hand in hand? Because I don't think a lot of people out there understand
for sure.
that it does in a really big way.
And I think there's two things that the offering that we get a lot of attraction from the automotive industry for, whether it's from OEMs themselves or the agencies that they represent from a media perspective. Two things that we have that are extremely valuable to automotive, being able to attract conquest and loyal customers as they come through, one of which is location. We've got kind of the ipso facto best location services in the country, being able to understand where devices are, when, where, and how long. And then layered on top of that is just all of the data that we already have that is with respect to weather. Weather plays an incredible amount of role in all Canadians' lives.
Sure. I
Automotive
almost check it daily.
Automotive is no exception. So there's that frequency. There's a brand safety component that automotive loves because it's a very brand safe environment. There's you can see in some of the screens that are in this room, you're not going to see a ticker for what Trump tweeted today. You're going to talk about things that are specific to your local environment. Some of the other things that we look at is that weather is always part of the moments that you have all the way through, whether that's in a car buying scenario or if it's even just planning for what you're going to do with a vehicle as it comes through. We see extreme spikes in impressions that we see on both desktop and mobile on Wednesdays and Thursdays before a long weekend. So we'll see today is a big day because we're leading into the Easter weekend.
That makes sense.
And that's how people start to dictate how they're going to use their vehicles, whether they're going to shop for a new vehicle. And we have all those kind of machine learning that kind of develops all those pieces of data all together to kind of build a bit of a profile about how people treat weather when they're talking about buying a car, when they buy a car, and how they're going to use a car in the future.
And a lot of it comes down to is that data that you collect. I mean, when I think of weather and how I've probably used it in the past during my marketing efforts was more in the service department. It was like, hey, I know that snow is coming, so I'm going to start advertising my snow tires. And I know that, we're into spring and the rain season is upon us, and I'm going to start marketing my windshield wipers and wiper inserts, right? And that, for the most part, I think that's probably where most dealerships think how they associate weather marketing efforts, but it's actually a hell of a lot more than that.
Yeah, and those are kind of table stakes as we go through. We still sell lots and lots of that as it comes through, because there's, the easy technical piece of it is someone will, as you had mentioned, we do a lot of all-wheel drive advertising and snow tire because the weather itself. But we can also look at conditions on a hourly, daily basis as we go through. So if you start looking at, we've got a number of my advertisers that will actually do advertising that serves a different creative when it's snowing outside. So it's when it's physically snowing on the windshield itself, then that's when they're starting to serve it through. We have others that are also looking at, if there's a forecast for snow that's coming up, then we start looking at some of those things as we go through. But it's not just about, inclement weather necessarily. The Weather Network is kind of unique in that people check weather constantly, even when it's beautiful outside.
It's on my phone all the time. I mean, actually, my kids got up this morning.
Exactly.
And the first thing they went to do is they went and said, Alexa, what's the weather today?
Right.
Or Siri, what's the weather today?
Exactly.
Like my kids are doing it at 5 or 6 years old.
And it's ingrained, specifically in Canada. We know in Canada specifically that we talk about weather almost 300 times more than anywhere else on the planet. Part of that's just because of our geography, but we also have weather patterns that change. The old adage in Canada is, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. Because it's just that kind of an atmosphere. And there's a big role to play there for how Canadian consumers look at vehicles and try to map that through. When you combine that with location itself, so we get location services from the Weather Network app itself. There's a function that's in there that you can either look at follow me, data that's on that side, that people, when they install the app, you can have that option that's on that. We take the privacy super seriously from that side, so you have that option to turn it on or off. What we find with the Weather Network app, however, is most people turn it on because there's a value exchange there.
For sure.
You're like, well, I get it. Of course, you need to have my location to be able to serve where the weather's going to be as I move throughout the planet. From that side, and it's those breadcrumbs that are dropped from that perspective that we get location services.
Yeah, I imagine the accepting rate
for sure
is incredibly high with your guys' app.
It is for sure
because it brings value to the customer to say yes.
It does, yeah, and again, there's that value exchange. If you're given a flashlight app and someone says, "Can we have your location services?" There's no value there. I don't understand why you would need it in the first place. But that happens out there, certainly in the app side of the equation. When you have something that's kind of our data that's specific, then we're real precise about the location that's there. And in automotive, when we say that someone's found in a Ford dealer and you're a GM advertiser, we can kind of stand behind that because we know that they were there.
And that's really what the whole theme of today's talk is going to be about, is you guys are collecting a tremendous amount of locational data and behavioral data. And it's a matter of, how can dealerships actually utilize this? Because you got to understand there's still just this cloak of mystery behind how dealerships can actually utilize app data.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and you touched on it just there, is what's the behavior that people exhibit because of the locations that they're found. So again, it's something we're completely capable of doing, and it's in most of the campaigns that I'll work with our partner media agencies of doing, competitive dealerships. We want to find those people that were there, and so that we can serve them a message for something that's tactical or a new product launch. But you can get a little bit more sophisticated, much more strategic when you start looking at if we want to find dog owners in this country. The easy piece would be, I think there's some surveys that say that there's a certain amount of people. You could go to Environics, you could go to a number of different places to find that. The way that we define a behavior like dog owners is we map all of the dog parks in Canada. If you're found there 2+ times in a week, then you're a dog owner. If you're not a dog owner, you are certainly a dog walker, or you have a very, a passion for the animal and being in that.
It's going to be relevant for you, and I think this has been such a heavy topic for me this year. It's been something that's been building for years now, but it's just got to the point now where the industry is and where sales are in the industry, and we're running into right now what I call kind of a plateau, and we all freak out about it, right? But this is really totally normal for us. We run 4 or 5+ years of double-digit, prosperity, and then we plateau, right? And look, a lot of manufacturers out there, a lot of dealerships that are looking at the numbers. They're not going to be selling as many cars as they did the year before. All right, for the simple reasons is we've hit that plateau, and we're going to be in this plateau for the next few years. So these are great opportunities to take a look at our effort, take a look at our strategies, and see are we actually capitalizing every single penny that's being spent out there, or are we still closing our eyes and throwing darts in the dark and hoping that we hit something?
It
right?
is, for sure. And it's about, advertising is designed to be something that kind of serves something to you at the right moment, the right time. I mean, that's the,
and that's specific to the audience.
And that's
that it has to
it
has to be relevant to me.
For
right?
sure, yeah. And timely in many cases. With the location side of things, I'll give you a great example of one that for individual dealers themselves, but even dealer groups can kind of take advantage of. We know, historically, certainly from the insights that we have from location, is the second busiest day in the week that devices are found at your dealership is on the day that you're closed.
Yes, Sundays.
Sundays.
Oh, actually, when I was a salesperson, a little side story here, but I actually did. That was one of my ways just to be and stay on top as number one salesperson in the dealership. I would show up on a Sunday, for 3 to 4 hours and hang out on the lot when the lot was closed and hand out business cards to all the people that were coming in.
Yeah, and what mobile now allows you to do is you don't have to be there for that kind of component that's there. And in fact, if you look at it deeper, is to say the reason why the consumer's there in the first place, if you get to the kind of the root cause of it, they're there because they're wanting to see, does the color match what I saw on the website? How does it look in the daylight? Is there a vehicle actually in stock there? I'm not down the funnel far enough that I actually want to start talking about price and talking to a salesperson. I'm now just kind of exploring it from that perspective. The right message for someone that you serve to, we can collect devices at the dealership on Sundays and anytime after 6 o'clock. Both of which is when most people are kind of, casually kind of loitering to look at some of the vehicles. They're in that funnel.
I had some people show up at 2, 3 a.m.
For sure.
Because I had cameras on my lot.
Shift work.
Sure enough, someone would show up at 3 a.m., park outside the lot, and then walk the lot at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah, and then to be able to serve them a piece of advertising that is relevant for the place they are in that funnel. You don't want to, if you know that there's some devices that are found at those certain times and they're around your dealership or your competitors, you don't want to serve them up advertising that says 0% for 84.
No.
Because they're not there yet. But it's very reasonable to say, come in for a test drive.
For sure.
Because that's the place they are now. They're willing to come onto your lot. They're starting to look quite seriously. They're likely at a consideration list of 2 at that stage.
They're at an
so
interest
let's invite
level.
them into...
They're an interest level.
For sure.
That's where it is. They've done a behavior where they've now shown interest with it.
Right.
Now, I'm actually kind of curious. When we say you target the devices on a lot, like how accurate? I mean, all the way down, are we talking like 5 feet? Are we talking 1 kilometer?
It's about 5 meters that we'll get down to for
it's
our
really close.
breadcrumbs.
And the reason I'm asking is because, I have dealerships. Well, there's an auto mall really just down here, right? And they're all right next to each other, so you can get really targeted.
There's 2 different ways that we look at, because we recognize that there's auto malls. There's also connected buildings, like Ford and Lincoln dealers are connected on that side. Sometimes they may have a luxury part of the business that have connected parking lots, but they have 2 buildings. We, certainly in Canada, you can't have 2 brands under the same rooftop unless you're a used car dealer, but we kind of recognize that there's different functionality. We've polygon mapped the rooftop of every dealership in Canada manually. So this isn't just a pull from an algorithm to say, here's the lat long, so we're going to drop a pinpoint. We've actually drawn the rooftop buildings of each one of the dealers across the country, so that when there's a GPS signal that drops from the weather network within that polygon, then we know that that's a visit. We qualify a visit by someone who has been in there. A breadcrumb gets dropped around 3 to 5 minutes every 3 to 5 minutes.
So it is, I was going to ask. So it's checking, the weather network is checking GPS locations every 3 to 5 minutes?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. For those who have Follow Me kind of enabled.
Yeah. Which is a good chunk.
The good chunk.
Would you say majority?
7.1 million Canadians. So
a
large
very large chunk.
Yeah. So, and on top of that, we also start looking at the amount of time that they're found there. So we don't qualify a visit to a dealership unless they've been there 2 consecutive breadcrumbs. So you would have had to get pinged twice in the building. We do that purposefully, and we can monitor. We can change that if the client wants it. But we do it purposely because you will have people who just drop off. You might have people that drive by. You might have people that walk by. You might have people that went to the drive-through at the Tim Hortons across the street, and that's an erroneous breadcrumb that might have been found at your dealership. So if you're found there twice, then we know that that's a qualified visit.
Now, twice, is it in a certain amount of time? Because I'm trying to think, so I have my service department, right? My service department can write hundreds and sometimes thousands of work orders a month.
Yep.
But the front of my dealership's not going to see necessarily those people. So, I mean, are you looking at maybe, is it frequency of visit? Yeah, that's how we kind of determine the more on the sales side versus service side?
Yeah, the sales and service, we can't get so precise within the building.
Which makes sense. There's always going to be some
other.
limitation. There has to be some point,
For
right?
sure. And we've got lots of vendors that we work with that will claim that that's the case, but we know the technology, while you can do it with a hard-coded beacon that's in the dealership itself, hardware and beacon has its own kind of pieces that gives you information that may or may not be on that side.
Yep.
We work with a few clients that have beacons in the store to get it down to that precise piece.
Oh, okay.
So we work with them from that side. We just don't always recommend it, because when you're advertising, while it's a marketer will very quickly say, I want to be able to do one-to-one. I want to talk to an individual customer because I know they're in that funnel. There's two things that kind of slam that. Mm-hmm. One is privacy,
of course,
from that perspective. And the second is just from a marketing perspective, is that when someone says we're looking for in-market car buyers, it kind of drives me a little crazy, because everyone's in market for car. You don't know when, you don't know who influences who. I've influenced probably 6 people on my street for vehicles to buy.
Sure.
But I'm not the purchaser.
Yep.
But I may have been found in different places. When someone says that there's a special that's, I can get 2 breakfast sandwiches at McDonald's for $5, I'll tell that to my neighbor, and that might influence that piece.
It puts them into market, right?
It does.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily that the one-to-one, while it's powerful, if you're doing kind of a DM or you're looking at something that's very conquestable, is with mobile app advertising, you do want to kind of get a bit of an awareness build that's off of that there's components there.
You kind of need multiple touch points, which
sure.
makes sense why you guys are looking at 2 touch points, 2 cookies.
Yeah, we do it as 2 in that side, just for that it's a verified visit. We know that you're there. On top of that, we also work with clients to say, well, how do we make sure we get staff out of that equation?
Yeah.
Or suppliers that come in, or contractors that are building on that side. So we do a dwell time on that side. So anybody who's been found there for 3 hours or more every day is knocked out of the equation, because we assume that they're going to be employees.
See, just good usage of, and I guess also probably another behavior would be if they had gone to multiple dealerships.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the same thing. So if you have someone who has gone to multiple dealerships, we have that train as it kind of follows itself through.
That's
so
another trait that we can look for.
Yeah, and we've got the ability to do some real customized pieces. We work with both Tier 2 and Tier 1, where they want to find out, I'm interested in devices in Canada who were found at a Toyota dealer,
sure,
and were found at a Honda dealer within 30 days.
Yeah, and
we can do those kind of traces, right?
And that's just at the dealership level. But we can even take this even farther, right? I remember running one of our best Dodge Grand Caravan campaigns was against people that have just recently visited Babies R Us.
Yep.
Now, that was the website. But you guys could do the exact same thing from a physical location.
We have them all polygon mapped too.
Because it's a very targeted audience. Like there's only certain people that are going to Babies R Us.
And that's really the smart way to approach it, because there's a lot of different marketing channels, and we encourage dealers to continue to spend money on Google and Facebook, because they're great platforms. They're exactly what we want to have. We kind of venture to be your number 3 partner. I guess is really what we amount to.
It's down to that level.
Is to looking at those pieces, right?
I mean, the first thing we want to do is we want to create the goal and objective, right? I think what happens is dealerships are listening to this and they're like, maybe even salivating, like, oh, you can do what exactly? Yeah. Like, I mean, that's exciting news, right? And I don't know necessarily a lot of dealerships know that we can do this. That first step is that at this point it's just a good idea, but we haven't taken the first step yet. And the first step is to really make that goal and objective. Like, what is the goal and objective? In this case, for that Caravan one, is that we wanted to increase our Caravan sales within that quarter by 25%.
Right.
So then once we knew what that goal and objective was, then we had to define the audience that's going to help us meet that goal and objective.
Right.
Now once we've defined the audience, that's when we get to come to you.
We
can work on all kinds of different ways of trying to target that specific
and where
audience.
we work best is at that early stage, when we start understanding, so what's the ultimate kind of KPI that you're trying to look for?
Yeah.
And then try to back it up to understand what's the kind of audience that will get you to that side. We can access virtually any audience in Canada. We just want to make sure we're really strategic as we put together. In your example with Caravan, you actually identified to say, we're looking for parents and we're looking for people with young kids, because that's the vehicle that fits their side. Your ultimate KPI is to sell more Caravans,
100%.
right? But in terms of trying to find that audience, we would work with you and say, that's awesome that you've identified a particular niche on that side. It's very strategic. We'd work with you and say, look, we have all of the Toys R Us and Babies R Us mapped across the country or in your neighborhood.
Sure.
We also know, we define parents in our side is that we also know when people drop off kids at daycare centers
so between the hours of 7 to 9 all locational stuff.
And pick them up again at 4 to 6. So we know that those are parents. So we can start looking at when you come to us and say, we've got this, our challenge is trying to get parents with young kids.
Yeah.
You leave it with us and we can come up with 100 different solutions for being able to find that audience.
And see, and that's where, kind of what I was talking about earlier, this is what we have to do right now.
Yeah.
Right? Budgets, I think, are going to get tighter over the next 24 months. All right? And that just means that we need to stretch the efforts of every single one of those pennies out there.
Yep.
And by taking the time to develop up those goals and really identifying those audiences and then working with a company that can really come up with creative and unique ways of targeting the audience. Yeah. Like, I love the dog walker, for example. Like, I'll give, for example, like, and actually, I was actually in a Subaru meeting where Subaru actually openly came out and said that our audience are a lot of dog owners.
Right. Yep.
They just know it. They just like, this is who our audience is, right? They have dogs.
Right.
So it's like they can, and they've made creative.
Correct.
Literally based on that, showing, in fact, actually, I remember the Subaru, I don't know, if you just recently saw it, but it launched in the last probably few months or something, where the dog jumps into the kayak and it's floating down the river.
Yep.
And then the Subarus and the family are chasing down the dog. But they knew who their audience was, right?
Yeah, and they do a great job. Again, they were one who identified, here's a particular niche that we've noticed about our side, and that, even though that's coming from an OEM perspective, each individual dealer has community-based things that are really interesting to them. I think what's going to have to change in automotive marketing, and whether it's through us in a location or app or desktop scenario, or whether it's in broadcast or wherever, is the creative needs to match the message that you've worked so hard to gain that audience. You just talked about it from that side. Even in the caravan example, where you've identified, and probably rightfully so, that it's parents with young kids is who we're after.
Yep.
If you serve that audience 0 for 84, they don't care.
It doesn't make a difference.
But if you serve them something to say, if you come in and we will check your seat for free on Sunday, and as part of that you get a $500 something.
Sure.
Towards the purchase of, or instruct something from your creative that shows a sliding door. They start looking at what does the audience
the creative
appreciate.
has to be also audience specific.
You've worked so hard to get that audience. You've done a great job of the moment, the time, and the placement.
Yeah.
Now be really smart about the creative that's being served to them.
And I think that's what I'm pushing everyone right now. That just seems to be my huge theme over the next 24 months, is that every single part of our marketing efforts needs to be audience specific.
Yeah.
Like, we got to know who we're targeting, why we're targeting them, and the creative needs to be specific to that audience, right?
And part of that, the audience dictates what you'd have from there, but it's in some cases just understanding where they are in that journey as they go through. That if they're starting to look at safety and will it fit 4 kids and all their stuff, that's actually kind of mid-funnel. Like, they're not really all the way through. You're looking at features and benefits and pieces there. It's, you kind of follow that person, and then once they get to that stage, then you can start looking at tactical things like incentives and being able to buy it now and deliver today.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. The auto show was just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Did anybody reach out to you?
In fact, they did.
Okay, good.
We
talk about just a
we've had about
center of good audience.
Probably about 6 different clients that came through. So
I'm curious, at what level? Did manufacturers?
Manufacturer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did anybody from?
Nothing on a tier 2 or tier 3 side from that side. So just for the benefit of your audience, we of course polygon each one of the auto shows across the country.
Why not?
Makes sense. On that side. Toronto and Montreal being kind of the largest ones. From that side, we just got finished doing Calgary not that long ago, and we can either put those together as individual kind of audiences or bundled together. So in the case of an OEM, they're looking at, we just want to have everybody who is found at a dealership, and we're found at the other way around. Everybody who was in the auto show and were found at one of our dealerships, we want to serve them up with a $500 auto show piece.
Or if like we said, we're talking about the audience before, I want to target all parents with young kids that had gone to the auto show who live in my area.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point. It's the great thing about audience is you can find an audience.
Yes.
The bad thing about audience is you have to have scale in order to make it efficient.
Sure.
From that side. So as you begin to put a lot more targets on things, you can get down to a pretty small piece, but then your media becomes pretty expensive on a per unit basis because you're still paying that same kind of amortized piece.
So what is kind of a minimum bucket? Like
Yeah, so like in terms of dollar amount or audience?
Audience.
On an audience, we like to be able to work with something that's got, we work from a devices perspective, so we'd like to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 devices found.
Oh, so that's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
And we're not talking a crazy
It's not a lot.
amount. I'm just thinking in theory, a dealership, I know RibFest is coming up for a lot of dealerships, and I'll tell you what's really common.
Yeah.
Dealerships really like to sponsor RibFest.
Sure.
At dealerships, we like food,
Yep.
so it makes sense,
Yeah, it makes sense.
right? So we'll go put and actually spend a fair amount of money, all right, putting 3-4 trucks or cars at the RibFest.
Right.
But the problem is that it can generate attention, but then what do we do with that attention afterwards?
Right.
It just kind of falls off.
Yeah.
Is that something? I mean, 'cause
It is for sure, and you know, the thing that I say with my clients is don't get hung up on location has to be your dealership or your competitive dealership.
Yeah.
A location can be an event, it can be a concert, it can be a gathering, it can be an experiential event if you're doing ride and drives across the country, if you're doing whatever that happens to be. But even locally, if you wanted to look at something around your local arenas, and if you were trying to attract that, we can do that as well. So don't get hung up on location has to be even a bricks and mortar. It could be a park, it could be
Sure.
provincial parks is another popular one that we're starting to approach now. They just started to, if you do any kind of camping, which lots of OEMs love to sell SUVs, and
Yes, it's a
our
part of a
most
lifestyle in a lot of
part
cases.
of a lifestyle.
Yep.
So for one client in particular, we have mapped out all the provincial parks across the country.
That's
And
awesome.
we're going to start pulling that together and then serving them up message that is specific to the capabilities of that SUV and the cargo space. And that smart strategy of being able to identify someone who's in the moment and serving them up with creative, that's going to be important to them before, during, and after they go to that park.
Well, it's so relevant. I mean, I imagine the engagement rates have to be quite high.
They are. We see some significant click-through, but again, it's very specific to making sure that creative matches the audience that's on that side, and we can measure that. The other piece that we can do that requires a little bit more scale from that side, we can also do dealer foot traffic analysis, where we can look at the ad that was served and whether or not that person was then found at a dealership later, to be able to
connect
kind of
the
say
dots.
a bit of a connect the dots of. I don't like to use the word attribution because I think by saying
it's
attribution,
a buzzword and everybody wants to then the whole
but I think
conversation will change into
it's the best measurement that there is in the field to kind of bring online to offline.
Yes.
As being able to see the ads that we might serve on that side, we pixel those ads, and then we can look at exposed and non-exposed to that ad and see whether or not they were found in the dealership afterwards. And then we can do lift based off of those two pieces.
Now,
so that's
I'm
a great way
on
to see that.
On the creative side, what do you guys? I'm sure you guys A/B test a lot of different type of creative formats. All right, which creative format are you guys mainly lean to, or are you guys starting to work on? What have you seen in the creative space?
in an app environment, it's bigger is better. I mean, if that was to kind of put it that way, you can have what we would call kind of baby banner, which is kind of 300 by 50s and those kind of smaller ones that you'd see in an app, and they drive lots of impressions as they come through, and they're important as a filler all the way through. But we find in terms of an engagement piece, anything that's an interstitial or a big box or something that's a larger ad size.
And I imagine these are in motion. These are HTML5.
Yeah, video
properly animated.
Video will always
display or video, right?
We'll do it from that side. So it's budget dependent, I guess, on that side. It's funny with video, people assume that it's going to be extremely expensive. It's just now it's actually quite reasonable, and you can actually do some really interesting animated static images that make it look like it's motion.
We do a lot of HTML5 ads, and it gives you that presence of motion, but you're not spending ungodly amount of money on. And even like you said, video production now. It's a funny thing with my business. 2018, we did produced roughly about 300 videos for dealerships.
Right.
All right. This year, it's now third month of the year. We've already exceeded 300.
Right.
I remember 3 years ago, I had a graphics design team of almost 10 people, and a small video team of a couple. And now that's almost fundamentally shift. Yeah. Where now I have a graphics team of 8 people, all right? Or I have a video team of 8 people and I have a graphics team of only 3.
Right. Yeah, and we see that, certainly with our clients too, is that video is more than half now as it comes through, but we encourage anytime you can is to do motion. We don't necessarily say it has to be video or it has to be static, but motion is what's important.
Yeah, motion's important. Now, of course, the upside with the video is that we can really measure engagement.
For sure.
So now we really get to see how we target the audience, what was the crave that we presented to that audience, and then they may not have clicked, but did they engage? Did they consume it, right? Did they go 2 seconds in? Did they go the full 15 seconds?
Yeah.
or 30 seconds or whatever it is.
Yeah, and we find, certainly on the Weather Network app, we're seeing engagement is usually around 7 seconds on a video.
Okay.
So
and that's a good mark for you guys, or is that average?
That's an average.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. We will almost always encourage any of our clients to not do 30s.
Yeah.
And
so what are they doing? Are they doing 15s? Okay.
Typically 15s. And again, if you have a 15, 6 is still the best.
Yep.
If you've got that, because then not only do you have 2 pieces of creative now, because you're going to run it as a 15 cut in 2 and edit it out, but if you have a 15, just make sure you get to the point in the first 6.
Really fast.
Yeah.
I'm amazed. Facebook's now optimizing for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm just I'm like, really?
Yeah, and
I
think
that fast?
Yeah, I think 3 is a bit too early, and I only say that for automotive specifically.
Yeah.
Automotive is still a very visual, purchase. There's a lot that has to happen within that kind of visual cue that's on a smaller screen.
Yep.
And 3 seconds, while it might be great for a Tide or something from that side where it's very impulse buy,
yep.
A vehicle to me just feels like it needs to have a little bit more of romance.
Well, it's got to have a little story. It's got to have a bit of a story to
sure.
it, right? It's the dog
Right.
going down the kayak,
yeah.
or it's the mom placing the baby into the car seat and with one button closing the door.
Yeah. And the only thing I would encourage dealers specifically when it comes to video ads themselves is because the span is usually 6 or 7 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them will put the information that's most important to the dealership and the consumer at the end of that video.
Mm-hmm.
So at the very end, it'll talk about where they are, the phone number, and the directions, or whatever the offer is at
yep.
that time. Start looking at ways of bringing that forward. When people are looking for dealerships, they're really looking for 3 pieces of information. They already know what the car looks like because they have the ability to look for that everywhere else.
Sure.
But hours of operation, where are you, and what makes you different? Like those are just the 3 things.
Differentiating factor.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's outside of marketing strategies really need to be more audience specific,
Mm-hmm.
and outside of creative being more audience specific. Differentiating factor.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah. And that differentiating factor doesn't have to be, wildly different from someone else. It could be we're open late on Fridays. Like that could be your differentiator.
Well, it's convenience.
It could be
There's absolutely
whatever
nothing
that
wrong
is,
with that, right?
Yeah.
I drove by a dealership. I was up in Barrie the other day, and I drove by the dealership, and they had a sign outside that their service department's open until 2 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Till 2 a.m.
For shift work, yeah.
Shift work, and I think they do a lot of commercial stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's crazy. So then I go to their website. I can't find anything on their website saying that they're open until 2 a.m. But they got a sign outside of their dealership saying they're open until 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, huge differentiating factor, but I couldn't. Now, they may be running ads. I did see the ads, but I couldn't find that message, that differentiating factor online.
And another way that we help, not so much in OEMs, but certainly in tier 1 and tier 2 and some tier 3, is if they're willing to be able to provide some of the customer data, then we can match that up against the location itself. Now that'll scare people.
How does that work?
But really all I need is postal code. 6-digit postal code, and I'll map that against our devices, and we can say, of those postal codes, here's where those were found. What it does is it really quickly kind of gives you a bit of almost like a heat map or a bit of an indicator to say,
where your customers are.
My customers, where do they live, where do they work, and what else are they where else have they been from that side? And that might help to dictate some of your strategies as it comes through. The other
also
thing to look
help
at,
give the creative some direction. It's similar to
sure.
kind
It's
of
an insight.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to like Google Analytics with their insights of trying to target hobbies and interests and stuff like that.
Sure.
But that's still very, very limited.
It is.
They can only capture so much percentage of the website
small.
data with that.
Yeah.
Sounds like this way, you're going to capture a lot more of
Yeah,
it.
you're just finding the location of the people that you already know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and now what else have they done outside of your dealership, and that's part of it. The other is to look at kind of those strategic moments that we always work with clients on that side. Is we talked about the Sundays and after 6 to try to find people who are kind of in market for sales and not service, because the technicians have gone home, so they're only in the dealership for one reason. You can also look at kind of competitive piece. Dealers, I know, just from my own experience, that there's the 10-day and the 20-day. You can start looking at most people don't purchase vehicles in that first 10. They're usually delivered in the last 20. So you can start looking at, I want to see all the devices that are at my competitors in the first 10 days of a month.
Yeah, with data like this, you can create awareness, you can easily develop interest, and you can go full on 10, 30-day strategy and go just straight call to action.
Yes, it's just
based
trying to
on the
understand
different levels of data or different behaviors that you're looking at.
The only recommend that I tend to do also with dealers is give it time. because you'll have a tactic,
yep.
and if it doesn't deliver on, if you did that example of a 10-day and looking at kind of competitors, people that were found in my competitive dealers in that first 10 days of a month, that means they're about to buy that month.
Yep.
And I want to be able to target them for the second 20, whether that's a heavy tactical message or whether that's a have you considered, but you have to give that some time to see what those trends look like.
For sure.
Because you just organically, I can guarantee you that May is going to be a high traffic month.
Yep.
You don't have to use us, and I can tell you that just from a weather perspective, it's going to be a killer month for dealers.
It's going to be a good month.
But if you just only saw that in its own silo, you wouldn't necessarily change your strategy because of it. You have to look at it kind of over a 3-month period is what we like to see.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of see where those developments start to happen.
For sure. I mean, again, it's all about just capitalizing on every single penny that gets spent.
Yeah.
And you need to give time. I tell people that strategies are kind of like fine wines, right? You just give them time, and they just continue to grow, and they get better, right? But then, of course, we do have to have a cut-off period where we just say, okay, this wasn't necessarily giving us what the return was.
Right.
I've run campaigns. I've run very large campaigns, and for all intents and purposes, I look at the online analytics, and this should have been a freaking home run. I mean, astronomically high engagement rates, constant repeats, customers coming back to the site multiple times to consume the data or additional data or more information, more and more. And then it just doesn't translate. It's like, I have a dealership right now. Everything, the ad engagement looks great, the website engagement looks great, everything is way above where it is, but for some reason, they're just not coming to the dealership.
Yeah.
And that's where we just got to test it. There's no guarantee that any of this is going to work. We got to give it some time. And if it doesn't work, then we got to either make sure that either the audience was off, the message was off, or something had to be off. We weren't giving them maybe enough of a reason to come in.
Yeah. And then I think the last piece I would say, location has enormous potential in being able to pull those kind of audiences together, but also understand, like we talked about it off the start, is that the power of the weather itself, not because it's weather, it's because of what it represents to the person in their time period. One of the things that I'd lead off on certain speeches, I'd say, is what was the color of your uncle's tie at your wedding? And people would say, I have no idea. And I'd say, what was the weather like that day? They're like, oh my God, it rained like hell. It was terrible. You remember there are moments that it kind of dictates from that side. And I would say that even for individual dealers themselves too. In our world, when someone says, what's your prime time, whether it's on our broadcast properties or desktop, our prime time is not, in the mornings necessarily. It's not at night. It's when there's shitty weather. Like that's when we get our Super Bowl as it comes through. And
that last storm we had,
and interestingly, the Weather Network is probably one of the few people that knows what the weather's going to be 5 days from now. So take advantage of those kind of opportunities, and you'll get higher impression rates because you're pulling in people who are going to be on there more frequently, and we can already dictate that ahead of time, and they could happen at any moment. And weather is one of those things that's not just snow and rain. It's we had a whole bunch of rain just a little while ago in Toronto, and our traffic was at its all-time high for an April. So those things happen just as a spur of the moment. So, but we can predict those things.
You can. With people listening to this, I want to make sure that they understand that we're not just talking about creative placement just on the Weather Network.
Correct.
I know we keep using the word Weather Network, but I'm just I want to think that this is the only place
with
that
all the
goes.
Audiences we have, both weather triggering as well as data audiences for location. We can run them either within the Weather Network properties or on every app available in Canada that accepts the advertising side. So we've got a programmatic piece on our platform as well, where we can do in-app advertising for all devices in Canada, not just the ones that have Weather Network, but all devices.
And these are in-app marketing pieces.
Correct.
So that just so they know. And how many different apps do you guys currently work with? Do you have an idea?
There's hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
Like it's
pretty much you guys cover.
Yeah, it's virtually every app. Now we do whitelist and blacklist a lot of apps. Being one of the things that we pride ourselves on is certainly the brand safety and the trustworthiness from that side. So there are lots of apps we will not accept our advertising to be put on as we go through, and then there's some that we do allow on that side. And we use moat tagging as well as IAS and all the standards to make sure we know which apps are the right ones that we want, specifically in automotive, where we can turn things on and off.
Now, what advice would you give to a dealership right now that's we're coming into our hunting season? That's really what it is. We're in our hunting season, right?
Yep.
And here's what happens is we become very reactive during this time of year, because a lot of things are happening. It's like we're kind of off the slower time of the holiday seasons and the winter seasons, and now we're in a full swing, and things are happening really, really, really fast. Right. What advice can you give to dealerships right now in their full hunting season?
I think there's two things that I would say, and you nailed it a little bit when you say reactive and proactive. Mm-hmm. If you think you're going to change the mind of a consumer in April using in-app advertising, it will be effective in letting them know, but it's not going to help you kind of drive it through. What I would say to dealers is start looking at next month and what are the kinds of activities and moments that are happening in your community, and start with that. So is there something, what are your customers going to be doing in May? One of them could be, I'm starting to plan for camping. I'm going to there's a big, there's playoffs in town for something else. There's festivals in the summer that I'm starting to look at. So start looking at 2-3 months from now so that you can start building out a really effective campaign that serves up some of the advertising for them in advance, so that when the time comes that they're in that market, you're on that side. I say this even with OEMs, is that to be able to influence somebody in 2 weeks is very tricky.
And they all want it.
And they all do. But it's really, if you want something to work today, you have to plan for it, 6 weeks from now. And that's kind of how those things start to work and build themselves out. Well, so I would say look at the moments, and what are those things that would be, what kind of audience would be kind of unique because of that.
It all comes down to frequency, right? It's funny because they understand this concept, but for some reason when it comes to digital marketing, they don't understand the concept at all. They've been, at one point in time they bought TV ads, and some of them still are buying radio ads, and you would never go out just to purchase one ad one time.
Correct.
It would never work that way.
Exactly.
It's the frequency of your message that is important, and in addition to the frequency of the message, it's the continued story of the message, right?
It's the multitude of touch points. That's the effectiveness of mobile advertising specifically, and even in the desktop side. You do want to work with partners that have multiple touch points from that side. There's a reason why digital sells CPMs in thousands, because it takes a number of impressions for people to kind of pull that together. The advantage to digital is you can expose millions of impressions if you wanted to, depending on the budget, but that's the nature of how the digital goes, is that it's a constant reminder of the features, advantages, and moments that are important to you as a dealer.
So you get the frequency, and then in addition to that, which you can still get with traditional, you still get frequency with it, but the big differentiating factor is that once I have that attention, what do I do with it next?
Right.
If you're thinking of traditional marketing out there, and you're still doing a traditional marketing, you're doing your newspaper, you're doing your radio, okay, fine, you got the frequency down. You're in the paper every other day, same spot, same place, everywhere that.
Right.
Okay, cool, you get the attention, but then we can't build off that attention. Where with digital, we can absolutely build off that attention.
Yeah, and you can kind of nurture that relationship throughout that whole process, because as dealers know better than anyone, it's not. The hope is that when the customer comes in and purchases from you, that doesn't end the experience for them, that there's still kind of a nurturing of that as it comes through from an after-sales perspective, but even just from an influence of that person's new vehicle in the neighborhood of a bunch of older vehicles, right? So that there's kind of nurturing that effect.
Yeah, and that's the fun part. Actually, I actually find that to be the funnest part about doing the creative. Is we get to figure out kind of that storyboard of multiple pieces of creative and kind of tell that story over a period of time. I still think for a lot of dealerships out there, there is a fear about data. What do you say when you run into a dealership and they just, you can almost see in their eyes, like they're like, this just seems a little too, what's the word they use? Big brother.
Big brother.
Yeah. What do you say?
Yeah, and I would say the first thing is any vendor that walks through your doors that is talking about data is ask questions. Ask questions and ask more questions as you go through, because there is a lot of unknowns on that side, and there's a few vendors that have kind of taken it and they're able to kind of amortize something without fully understanding it. The advantage perhaps that we have is that we own the app. So it's an SDK level of app that we control the data in and out of it. We control the privacy of it. We control the opt-ins in and out. When you deal with what's known as bidstream, which is multitude of apps that provide GPS signals, and they aggregate that stuff through and try to make that serve. You can imagine that those GPS signals that come off of an app, you don't know necessarily that they're going to be Canadian.
Good point.
And you don't know whether or not they're been bought, like BOT, not purchased. And it's a currency. So every one of those GPS signals get sent by any app developer in the world. There's a price to it because we advertise against it. So there's a motivation there to be a bit fraudulent for certain ones to be able to pull those those responses up. So I would say anybody that comes in there and says, if you're spooked about data and the privacy, is ask the questions of the vendor. How do you treat privacy? How do you aggregate the data? And how do you anonymize everything that's on that side? It's a delicate dance because you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. As a marketer, you're like, well, I do want to reach one-to-one.
Of course.
But on the second side of it, like, well, but I understand the privacy of my customers. So you have to be able to yourself as a dealer understand, what's the limitations that you have with data and what there isn't. In our case, we aggregate and anonymize everything. There's no personal identifiable information because it's done by postal code on that side. So we're able to kind of look at communities of 10 to 15 homes, but not one home on that side. And that's the questions that you ask of the vendors. Anybody that says that they can reach an individual person on their device,
run for the hills.
Or lawyer up. Because as we start to develop a GDPR type of scenario that has happened in Europe already, where there is a succinct and explicit opt-in for any app, location services included. The one thing where we're covered, for instance, is when you download the app, it specifically says that when you click on Follow Me, that we're going to be selling the location services for marketing and advertising purposes. Do you agree, yes or no? Then we do it again later on to make sure that you understood what you're getting yourself into. So we're already kind of GDPR compliant. There's going to be a host of folks that won't be because they don't have the explicit opt-in of
Well, I think it's important for dealerships to understand that there are multiple levels of quality of data, all right? And it's very important for you guys to know where that data is coming from and how it was created. Just to recap, because I get this a lot. In fact, actually, I got an email yesterday from one of my clients who forwarded me an email from a vendor that I hadn't heard of, right? And pretty much he was promising exactly what you just said. Right. And immediately I was just like, don't even take the call. That's not how we're supposed to use the data. Those are big red flags.
Sure.
But let's say someone walks into my dealership and there's just a lot unknown about it, right? So what would you say the 3 main questions that a dealership needs to ask to a vendor that is really talking about utilizing data within their systems or offerings?
Yeah, I think the first right off the bat is just to say, what's your privacy policy? Like, what is your policy? Like, what's your belief? How are you going to treat my customers with your product? Like, how's that relationship going to be? I think the second is, especially when there's a transfer of data, and there's a lot of vendors that will say, well, just give me your customer list and I'll vet it and I'll change it.
That happens a lot. I'm amazed how sometimes it's freely thrown out there.
Be extremely careful in that environment. It's not to say you can't do it, but you ask those questions to say why.
Why?
That's the biggest thing. Is why would you ever need a last name of somebody in a mobile digital environment? You never will. You shouldn't. Ever.
Okay, cool.
If they're asking for anything outside of email or 6-digit postal code, then flags should go up, because you want to be able to say to that vendor, so how do you anonymize and how do you aggregate this data? That's really the questions that are on that side. And the last is really just how can I be assured that when I submit the list to you, that you're not going to resell it?
Yes, and that is really, really important right now.
Like, is this a one-time use? Is it being hashed when you send it to me? Like, there's a lot of questions there to say, because you have to remember, when you have a customer who's entrusted you and you've purchased a vehicle from them, or services or parts or accessories or whatever that happens to be, you've kind of given them your authority to have their name. You should treat that with the utmost respect as it comes through. And yes, we're in the business to advertise and influence and make sure that they come back to us for repeat business, but you respect it just the same as you would you send out some of your family members' pieces. Like, they are your family in many cases. So
I completely agree with you. I mean, dealerships, guys out there, this is your data. Please treat it as yours. It's something that you have spent a lot of time, a lot of money working in creating. Take the time to ask the questions and make sure that the company that you're providing that data to is utilizing it in the right way.
Yeah, you want to understand how they're using it, but just as importantly, like how are they hashing that data so that it can be anonymized and aggregated so that it can't be personally identifiable.
Sure. And then what do they do with the data when the campaign's done?
Right.
That question doesn't get asked, I think, enough.
Right.
You know, I mean, I had a dealership sign up, right? It was for subprime leads, and the dealership left the company to go work with a different company.
Yep.
And sure enough, they took all of those data that the dealership spent tons of money generating and creating, and just literally sold it right back off to another dealership.
Yeah.
You know, and so take the time, read through those documents.
Yeah, and I think just maybe even at the dealer level, if you've got someone who asks you to send their customer list in an Excel file on an email, that's your first flag.
Yeah.
Like if the company doesn't have the sophistication to be able to accept it in a third-party way, whether it's FTP or otherwise,
there's a really simple way of just
the technology
is not a difficult thing.
Perfectly acceptable.
Yep.
But that kind of tells you the sophistication of how they treat privacy, how they treat data, and how they're going to treat your customer name base as it comes through. Is just those little triggers from there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Kevin, thanks again so much for taking the time today and jamming with me.
That's good.
For anybody out there that would like to connect and maybe learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing or just find out more about, you know, the data that you guys are generating, what's the best place?
Yeah, probably just through our website, or I'll leave my email with you, and you can either use it as part of the post, and then we'll work it right back from there.
What is the website?
Theweathernetwork.com.
Oh, there's a section right there just for ads.
You can contact us from that side, and we can start to work it through from there.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks again, Kevin.
Great.
Man. Really
Cheers.
appreciate it.